This is Kevin Blair doing my Olympics project for the ski halfpipe. It was pretty fun to watch. So a little bit about the event and the history of the event. Ski halfpipe has been in the Winter X Games since 2002, so it's been around for a little while, but it was only included in just these last Winter Olympics in Russia. So it's only been around for 2 years now, or two Olympics now. It's a judged sport. Best of three runs is taken. And so the things that we're going to be focusing on are the things that they're judged on. So they're judged on their amplitude, technical difficulty, and the creativity in the landings, looking at if they're able to do their tricks and spins in different directions and how well they're able to land, and then also looking at any deductions that they might get. And so we'll tie in the biomechanical concepts with those things. So here's just a look at the half pipe that they were skiing, or that they were doing tricks on in Pyeongchang. Some of the stats on it, and just 200 meters in length, 22 meters from wall to wall, and you can just see how steep the slope of the walls are, and actually how steep it is going downhill as well. So here's a look at the medalists of the men's finals. USA got the gold and the silver, which is pretty great. And then we had Nico Portuis from New Zealand. He was really entertaining to watch, only 16 years old. And I read in an article that he actually ended up throwing up 3 times before his first run, and that's how nervous he was. So pretty great for him that he was able to be able to get a medal, and pretty cool to see someone so young be able to do that. I did watch some of the women's. I just didn't watch as much and didn't get as much information on it. But there's the results of this year's men's finals. So looking at some of the biomechanics involved in the sport and how the athletes interact with it. So they're going to be judged based off of their amplitude or the height of the tricks performed. And so part of what's going to help them get that amplitude is conservation of momentum, which is related to the mass of the competitors, the velocity that they're going to have going from trick to trick, and then also the friction that's going to be involved in that. They're also going to be judged on their technicality or creativity. So this is going to involve Newton's third law and how they interact with the forces in their bodies while doing different kinds of tricks and grabs while in the air. And then we'll also look at any falls or mistakes that they may make, and how ground reaction forces and high impulse moments are going to create some of those falls or mistakes, or contribute to any of those mistakes they might make. So starting out, looking at the amplitude or height that the skiers need to get and how conservation of momentum plays into that. So conservation of momentum is defined by that in the absence of external forces, the total momentum of a given system is going to remain constant. So we know that friction is going to play a factor in that there are some external forces that are going to affect that conservation of momentum. But a big part of what is involved in calculating that momentum is the mass of the skier and the skis multiplied by the velocity of the skier. And so based off that, if you have a larger mass, or if the skier has a larger mass, they should have a greater conservation of momentum, which should give them higher velocity, and then they should be getting a higher amplitude. And so we'll take a look here and see if that holds true. Looking at the actual amplitudes, I wrote these down as I was watching, and it would say the average and the highest. We can see that it actually does hold true, that David Wise, with the mass of 190 pounds, he had the highest average he had the highest average and the highest amplitude overall. There's not a huge difference between David and Alex, but I think it's cool that you can see just how much it changes between Nico and them. And that, like, Nico, his highest amplitude wasn't even reaching the average,
of the other two. And so it's also even makes his run even more impressive because he was doing a lot of the same tricks, but he's able to do them in a smaller amount of time because he's not able to get as high, less time in the air. But it was cool to see that there was an actual connection between how much these guys weighed or how much mass they had, and that they were able to actually get higher amplitudes. So friction is another factor that's going to affect conservation of momentum and the velocity, and it's when two surfaces come in contact with each other and try to slide over each other, there's a force that's created there, that friction. And so we're going to be looking at dynamic friction, which is that basically the upward force of the skier has to exceed the F-lim, or that limit of friction that is needed to keep it in place or keep them in place. And they also have to overcome the F slide in the downward direction. So they're not only having to overcome that limiting friction, but they also have to overcome the tendency to want to slide back down. This is ultimately why they do the waxing, is because they're trying to limit that F limb and limit that friction so that they can have that entire conservation of momentum that comes from that mass and velocity that they've built up. And so by increasing that velocity, they're able to overcome the F slide as well. And so basically, just the less friction you have, the greater conservation of momentum you're going to be able to have as well.
So we're also going to take a look at Newton's third law and how the skiers interact with Newton's third law. So it states that forces always exist in pairs that are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. And so when a skier goes up into a trick and is in the air, there's no ground for them or anything for them to create forces with besides their own body. So you can see that when the legs kick out and they're doing their grab, that the arm has to also reach out in the opposite direction with an equal magnitude of that grab. And so you can see that this is a way that they have to manipulate their bodies and basically use Newton's third law. So the last thing we're going to look at is ground reaction forces and impulses. So a impulse is measured by the amount of force times the amount of time that force takes place. So we can produce the same impulse by either having a large force over a small amount of time or having a small force over a longer period of time. So we can see here with our poor friend that landed on the edge of the pipe, by landing like that, he created a large amount of force in a very small amount of time, and that large amount of force was so high that his body wasn't able to produce enough force to keep himself upright. And so this is one way that the athletes have to interact with the course and make sure that they're doing things right, because they need to land perfectly going along the steep edges of those pipes, which basically what it does is it distributes that force over a longer period of time and decreases that impulse so that the body is able to handle that and then continue on into their next trick. And so that's why, again, landing is such an important part, and why the athletes have to interact with that so much, because they have to land perfectly on that edge and can't land too far into it. Otherwise their body can't produce enough force to counteract that impulse moment from the ground. So yep, that's my presentation.